NoMad Podcast.
I did it. I interviewed 21 people live at the BTC Prague conference 2024, and that was one of the most exhausting things I have ever done. I went from one interview to the other. So if you want to do it, you can try, but I tell you now it's exhausting. And I just want to say one thing. Thank you to both of the brothers who organized BTC Prague, because without them, I would have never probably even done that. So yeah, and I do want to apologize. There will be some background noise, so that let's not get confused about this. It was really loud. It was exhausting. It was the biggest conference in Europe. So if you hear some background noise, don't get confused. It's completely normal. But let's get right into the video.
First question.
What inspired you to dive into Bitcoin, and especially Bitcoin and movie making? What were your thoughts on that? And what role do you see Bitcoin playing in the future of the movie industry? And do you think there will be actors who might accept Bitcoin as a payment system? How did you get into Bitcoin? My first question for you is, how did you get into Bitcoin? And how do you see the relationship between Bitcoin, individual sovereignty, and basically our whole future? Like, how is it going to shape our future? How did you get into Bitcoin? How did you get into Bitcoin? But how did you get into Bitcoin? And what was your main motivation behind it? When and why did you get into Bitcoin? And how did you end up with being like the biggest YouTuber in Canada, right? How did you get into Bitcoin? How did you get into Bitcoin? First question for you is, how did you get into Bitcoin, and what made you believe that you want to educate people about this? How did you get into Bitcoin? And would you like to tell us something about your conversation, your email conversation with Satoshi? How did you get into Bitcoin, and was it hard for you to understand? How did you get into Bitcoin? How did you get into Bitcoin? When did you buy your first Bitcoin? And how did you get into Bitcoin? And why do you say that we need Bitcoin now? Why now? What do you believe are the most significant and legal and ethical implications of your husband's rights and the case of journalism? How did you get into Bitcoin? How did you get into Bitcoin? And what was so attractive about it? How did you get into Bitcoin? How did you get into Bitcoin, and why do you think we need Bitcoin now? What inspired you to start your own Bitcoin-only firm?
You know, my story into Bitcoin started with my story into crypto. Like literally the first thing I bought was Ethereum instead of Bitcoin. What a mistake.
Okay.
But essentially, you know, it was through during the bear market after the bull run in 2017, everyone that I started to follow when I was into crypto was no longer talking about crypto, because crypto is boring. Everyone was talking about Bitcoin. And this is, you know, what kind of got me going into all these things. Now, I studied finance. Also, I'm a developer. So, you know, it's something that it was easy for me to understand and get into and figure out the difference between each of these things. I even tried building on Ethereum using Solidity. And in fact, that was one of the click moments where I realized it's kind of useless. Like everyone says that you can build things on Ethereum that you can't build on Bitcoin. And very quickly you start realizing that to actually build things on Ethereum, well, you need to use outside data sources and build normal databases. And so you end up building just normal software. And at the same time, I was going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, like quite deep, reading the Bitcoin Standard, the price of tomorrow. So, you know, there was on one side all of these fundamentals about Bitcoin that I was really starting to understand, like how you don't need to change the code, how you don't need to necessarily build on Bitcoin, you can build around it. And the moment I realized that actually that's what people are doing anyway on Ethereum, I was like, wait, why would we go for this worst money? Like, let's just go for Bitcoin. Everything else is just a waste of time. And going down this rabbit hole, I decided to quit my job to focus on Bitcoin. And I spent 3 months not exactly knowing what it meant. What was I going to do, you know, focusing on Bitcoin? Like, I have multiple skill sets, but, you know, should I use them? How should I use them? And I decided to go with one of the skill sets that I had never used at such a big scale, which is the filmmaking. I had done filmmaking courses. I had done some like travel vlogs and like these kind of things, but never a project of such a scale. And I don't know, I was just drawn by this need to talk about Bitcoin, explain what I see in it in this long format that I think has a lot of value, because You can go deep into a topic. If you make a film interesting, you can catch their attention. You can tell them what you think, what others think, and just continue through entertainment, pushing a bunch of information in an hour and a half, which worked well. My film got over 2 million views, right? So it's
Wow, that's
it's
crazy.
yeah, and so really, yeah, it's a passion for Bitcoin and always this passion for filmmaking that got me into making Bitcoin films. Now, I'm not really going to make any other kind of films, I think. I even say, I'm not a documentary filmmaker. I'm a Bitcoin documentary filmmaker, because there's just, there's so many stories to tell around Bitcoin that I think are worth telling. And I want to be one of the individuals that tells them. Um, Now, for your more greater question around the industry itself, I mean, I think there's huge potential, and I can give you an example. I co-organized the Bitcoin Film Fest that happens. So we do stuff at different conferences, but we have one edition in Poland in Warsaw every year. The last one was in April for the halving. We had films there that were not Bitcoin films. They were Bitcoin adjacent topics. They were about freedom of speech.
Yeah.
The filmmakers came over and they didn't know what to expect because they were coming to a Bitcoin film festival when they're not necessarily interested in Bitcoin. They're interested about the freedom aspects, but they were just very happy to be able to come here because their films, because of the topics that they were touching upon, were being they weren't accepted at other film festivals. They couldn't really find a place to screen them on some major platforms and the like. So they were very happy to come over to the film fest. And what they discovered is that we're a community of just people that are extremely friendly, extremely passionate, and the true passion that we have is freedom. And it's we have a passion for Bitcoin through freedom, essentially, right? And that's values that they shared completely. That's values that a lot of people share as well. And so they loved it, even though they weren't from the Bitcoin space at all. They just loved the idea of being in Bitcoin. And there's two of the projects of filmmakers that were attending the film fest that then opened a Geyser crowdfunding to accept funds for their next documentary film in Bitcoin.
Okay.
Even though that's not something they ever cared about, right? But they just saw that this is a community that is going to follow what they're doing because of shared values.
The first time I got into Bitcoin was in 2011, 2012, when a friend of mine, it wasn't me, was looking to buy interesting substances on the side of the road. I thought Bitcoin was slow, boring, unusable, right? And it took me a long time to finally realize that, hey, there's this thing called Lightning, which is a lot faster and easier to use. And I guess the barrier to entry for Bitcoin is a lot lower than Bitcoin easy to use. And then I saw lots of touch points around the world. In the Ivory Coast, my driver was using Bitcoin as a remittance tool. I met this guy in Lisbon, who's a Canadian guy, who managed to change his entire life by just saving a bit in Bitcoin. And yeah, there was another guy, this weird guy called Crypto Joe, who wore a cowboy hat. It was almost one of those cowboy hats that's like cemented to his head. He'd go around to all these parties and be like, oh, the world is going to end, like fiat money is dying, and it's going to be really fun guy to be around. And he was like, let's just study this Bitcoin thing. But of course, I thought he was a nutter who goes around parties saying that. But once you get enough touch points and enough weird interactions with people like Crypto Joe, then eventually you realize, oh, okay, maybe this Bitcoin thing is legit and is here to stay.
Yeah, good question. So I got into Bitcoin because really my first real touch point was at Occupy Wall Street. And so I was involved with those protests. I was very passionate about it. I could definitely see that Wall Street was a huge and corrupting influence. And it was really needed and necessary for us to try to fight that. But as I got into Occupy Wall Street, I realized that nobody had any solutions in any meaningful way. And it was very defeating, but I had a random masked anarchist mention Bitcoin to me, and that was kind of my first touch point. And so after Occupy Wall Street fell apart, I was pretty depressed. And I remember I came across the Wired article that was in Bitcoin that was published in 2011, and I read it, and something kind of clicked. So I just kind of started going down the rabbit hole trying to find anything I could on my own. And I was like, oh, this is actually a really interesting and innovative solution. And I didn't have any of the background in Austrian economics or sort of individual liberty. I was much more approaching it from sort of a leftist socialist perspective, which obviously didn't work. So I started to read Austrian economics and sort of, Rothbard and a few others. I was like, oh, like this individual liberty thing is like a really huge key to actually being able to kind of try to change the future. So I really started to change my own perspective. And then I think the thing that really put the nail in the coffin for me was when I heard about people that were funneling money out of China using Bitcoin. And I was like, whoa, like these guys can get around communist restrictions on capital. Like this is like a pretty big deal. So at that point, I was convinced that like this could change everything. So for me, I wanted to work in Bitcoin. I harassed Coinbase for a while until they gave me a job. And from there, it was just working on building, learning the tech, and really just sort of supporting the mission that I saw Bitcoin doing. And so the second part of your question, the future, I'm of the opinion that like the only way that we get to have a future with privacy in any meaningful way is by us first securing economic sovereignty outside of all financial systems. Because financial repression is essentially the methodology that they're using in order to ensure that people don't have privacy. So with Bitcoin, I think that there's very powerful methodologies for not only people to be able to self-sovereignly hold their money, but for them to do it in a thoughtful and private manner, not just through coin joining, but there's going to be more future methodologies to address that. And specifically, my book's called Crypto Sovereignty because I'm really big about the idea of cryptography itself being able to be an implementation for creating new forms of sovereignty. And so Nostr is another great example of that. And I think we'll get more tools like that as we move into this more draconian age where we're going to see financial privacy and surveillance becoming much more powerful.
At first, I encountered Bitcoin in 2011, I think, but I didn't get it at this time. It was in New Zealand while I was on the Occupy Wellington movement. And 6 years later, sometime in 2017, it was before the big bull run. So few friends told me about it, and it bugs my curiosity. So I kind of get into it slowly. I would say classic story. Buy a Bitcoin, then was looking for some another better Bitcoin, green Bitcoin, and some shitcoin. Went through the classic up and down, and TLDR is that it took me like 3 years to get to the Bitcoin only stage, which I would consider the best stage of my life.
So in 2016, I bought a property in consultation with Humboldt County in the state of California to turn the parcel into a licensed cannabis farm. And as soon as I closed escrow, I bought a house and I bought an adjacent 7-acre parcel. And when I closed escrow, it was the first property that I'd ever purchased. I had a real need and a desire to understand the boom bust cycles in the real estate market. And so I went down the economic rabbit hole and I wanted to learn about the Federal Reserve, learn about the stock market, learn about real estate, learn about investments. And in doing so, it led me to hard money, and that led me to Bitcoin. And so, after 9 months of studying real estate and equities and stock market and the Federal Reserve, I discovered Bitcoin. And being a commodity producer, I was very well primed to understand the magnitude of having a money that's truly scarce and something that as the demand increases, the supply can't change. It's a programmatic supply issuance. So I knew very quickly the magnitude of how important this discovery or technology was.
So I originally got into Bitcoin quite a while ago, 2011. My main motivation was that I was actually, to take you back, I was born in the UK, but I was conceived and my family and heritage was from Nigeria. Oh, wow. So I was a child of two worlds. And growing up, I would be traveling backwards and forwards between Nigeria and the UK, and I'll see the growing gap between the global haves and the global have-nots. So to put it in context, when I was around the time I was born and very early on, 1 naira was worth more than $1 US. Oh, wow. And now $1 is worth hundreds of naira.
Wow.
So that's, you can see, tale of two worlds. One is in the West, one is the global South. And I was always looking at, so I became aware that there was a challenge with money, and I was looking for solutions, but I couldn't find it until one day someone pointed out Bitcoin to me, because they could see me going on about this problem, and they also could see me going on about technology. And this is like this sort of technology that helped deal with making money fair wherever you are. And so I got immediately interested in it. And 2 years later, I formed the company. It went on to become the UK's longest running Bitcoin exchange. And the rest is history.
So it's kind of a weird story, but I used to teach little kids how to break dance for like a decade.
Wow.
Yeah. But that didn't exactly pay the bills. So I needed to have a side hustle. And so one of the things I learned how to do was to buy used MacBooks and then open them up, switch out the RAM and the hard drive. And so because of this, I was looking on a bunch of tech blogs and things like that. And so on those websites, I would run across Bitcoin articles from time to time. And so I saw it a bunch of times, felt like I missed the boat until finally I capitulated and started learning a little bit. Followed by 2 years of being really annoyed I could never find video tutorials because there were none. And so I just had to kind of figure it out. And once I figured out stuff on my own, I was comfortable enough to start making videos myself because I figured people would need them. And I guess the channel did well because it was a need. I was addressing a need I wanted filled. And I guess over time, people also needed much of the same. And here we are. So it's been 8 years of doing the YouTube channel. And I'm very happy to see now a lot more people starting to do educational content.
I got into Bitcoin after a really hard time during COVID. So when COVID started in 2020, slowly, you know how our rights were taken away from us and lockdowns,
Freedom of speech,
and masks and freedom of speech, and then vaccines. And I was one that was not willing to participate in an experiment, so I didn't want to take the jab. And so I spoke out about it, and I tried to show people that you shouldn't let the state invade your bodily autonomy and tell you what to do with your body, because it's your own choice what you choose to do with your body. I was anti-coercion and anti-discrimination. And so when COVID kind of ended or faded out, a very good friend of mine who is the head of the Bitcoin community in Israel, he wasn't my friend at the time, but he was just following my work during COVID. He came over to my office and he said, "You're ready to be orange pilled. You've been red pilled. Now you need to be orange pilled. Sit down. I'm going to teach you everything about Bitcoin." I told him, "Thank you. I was waiting for someone to teach me about Bitcoin." And he did. And he helped me do the first transaction. And basically what led me to go to that direction is that when I understood that they're going to invade their state is trying to invade my bodily autonomy, the next thing they're going to do is try to invade my property and my money.
And your
so
privacy.
I need to learn about money, and I learned about money, and then Bitcoin, obviously, because that's the path for me for establishing my sovereignty and freedom.
I got into Bitcoin in 2011 when I read a story on Slashdot called Internet-Only Currency Bitcoin Reaches Dollar Parity. This was February of 2011. The site is still up today, and that article is still on Slashdot. But that's when I first heard about it. And then I was immediately intrigued. I looked into it, tried to buy it, couldn't buy it, but, eventually got into it hardcore, like programming.
Originally, in 2012, I was working in fiat payments in a multinational company, and Bitcoin popped up in December 2012 as a new payment mode. But I was also a political activist in two different kind of groups. One group was privacy advocates and Assange people people I met protesting in front of the embassy where Julian Assange was held. So it was something mostly left libertarians concerned about government transparency, a little bit the Occupy Wall Street kind of people. But I was there because some of the issues were my own. And they started to talk about Bitcoin like the same week of my work colleagues, but this time about the money for WikiLeaks and stuff like that. Then I was also in a group translating Mises article from the Mises Institute in the UN, in Italian, and they started to talk about Bitcoin. Basically, 2 weeks later, in January 2013, as digital gold. So basically in 2 weeks, three of the main fields of my life, they were disconnected among them. So nobody was in the same group except me, in more than one group. And I felt myself as like the intersection, and Bitcoin was the other intersection. Everybody in my life was basically talking about Bitcoin. So I talked with my wife about that. And after a few months of obsession, she realized that it was very central to me. And so she told me, you should work on that. And since part of my job was education, I mean, my job was design of systems, but I was also teaching physics and doing some education. So education I started with consultants actually, but consultancy is boring because you have to pretend that you listen to the client and then you explain. Yeah. While teaching is more straightforward. I mean, you don't know shit, I will just tell you. Yeah.
I mean, I was interested in electronic cash before Bitcoin, and there were different systems, some deployed, some like open source projects that weren't economically usable, but you could try them, and some which were just ideas or papers. So DigiCash was one that was implemented, so I used that a bit. People thought that was pretty cool at the time, but it failed. Like the company ran out of money, and we think ultimately it failed because it was centralized, right? So, and then there were people interested to try and figure out how to build a new DigiCash that was more decentralized and would survive. So, and how I got involved or introduced to Bitcoin was I got the first email from Satoshi asking about. So he sent me a link to his paper, like a draft of the white paper, and asked how he should cite Hashcash. So he had like a collection of references at the bottom of the paper, and he wanted to know like what's the correct way to reference Hashcash.
Yep.
And then I exchanged a few emails with him over a period of time. And then I think he sent me another email in 2009 when he released the source code. So that was the interaction. Initially, I didn't publish those emails, but as part of the COPA trial, I gave them to the lawyers, and they became public record.
Oh yes, it's still difficult to understand, but I had a very gradual process. Unfortunately, I discovered it too early. So it was a very long and very gradual process of understanding. And the interesting thing with Bitcoin is you never stop this journey of trying to understand the new phenomenon, which is quite unique in history, that you can observe the monetization of an asset and the market discovery of a new asset. And it's a new asset class in itself.
I don't even remember. It's a long story. I guess the way most Bitcoiners do, just for crypto overall. And then eventually, after a long time, I got it. So I just went, I don't know, I was curious about the crypto world. Did a lot of mistakes, and then eventually learned through podcasts, reading books, articles, everything else, until I was a Bitcoin only maxi, I guess.
So how did I get into Bitcoin? I got into Bitcoin by complete accident. At the time, I was a journalist, and my boyfriend was like, hey, you need to cover the Bitcoin conference in Wynwood in 2021. And I went to go cover it. And when I did, I met incredible people that I was orange-pilled right away. I remember leaving the conference, putting everything into Bitcoin, and then months later, I was talking to Rizzo from Bitcoin Magazine, and he suggested I start doing YouTube for Bitcoin Magazine. So I started nibbling on that, and I decided to focus on education because I related a lot to myself at the time when I went into Bitcoin in 2021. So I realized there's a lot of normies that need to bridge, the gap from the intelligent people in the community.
The intelligent people,
I want to bring down the barriers, make it more welcoming for the normies.
Well, I first got seriously interested in Bitcoin in 2020 during the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns. Why was I interested? Because the world came to a grinding halt, because interest rates went to zero, and my company had a bunch of cash that was deemed to be a liability. And I saw the world coming to a grinding halt. I saw capital, shutting down. It shook my faith in a lot of institutions. And I realized that my company needed to find another path forward if we were going to survive. And so that got me thinking about everything I knew about money and investment. And I realized that the company needed a different treasury strategy. And so we discovered Bitcoin, and it was in the summer of 2020 that we first started buying a lot of Bitcoin.
Well, the case is a travesty from beginning to end. Julian is in prison for having published evidence of war crimes. He just did what journalists are supposed to do, news gathering. He received information from a source who wanted to expose wrongdoing. And he has been persecuted in one way or another for the past 14 years. The last time he was a free man was in December 2010. And ever since then, he's been in some form of restriction to his liberty and confinement. And over the past 5 years, he's been in a high security prison in London. So there's no way to justify his treatment. His treatment is a way to bully people who seek truth and accountability and who challenge runaway power. And he is being used as a symbol to make other people cower.
I got into Bitcoin thanks to my brother. He is a little bit more techie than me, so he introduced me. It was late 2020. So, for the whole pandemic and all, I was thinking we are living in a crazy world, but I really didn't know about Bitcoin. And then that's why when we got introduced and we just saw it as a way, to get more dollars. But then I started studying it and a lot of things started to click. And I was like, okay, perfect. It seems that this is what I was hoping for or waiting for. Let's see if it's true. And that's how I went down the rabbit hole.
That's a good question. I got into Bitcoin through my dad, and it was attractive to me because my dad is my hero. And so I liked whatever he liked. That's the truth, is I got really lucky. Usually people are unfortunate enough to have a dad that can see the future and understand something like Bitcoin like he did, and then get his kid into it. So I was lucky.
Oh, that's a funny story, actually. The first time I crossed the path with Bitcoin was in 2011 when a client of mine in my financial strategic consultant company asked me if he should invest 1,000 euros into Bitcoin. And I said, no, don't do it. It's a scam. It's internet magic money. Come on. It's definitely a scam. It's so obvious. And back then, I think the price was below €1. And I just told him, don't do it. But he did it, fortunately, because later on, he made the right decision, to be clear. But
The second time I crossed paths with Bitcoin was in 2013 when I did the research for my second book. I looked for a better monetary system. I was a gold bug back then. And then I made a research and I found, I think it was a Reddit article about Bitcoin. And I was like, oops, this is still around. I'm surprised because I thought it would have begun already because it was 2 years later. And then I thought, okay, give it a chance. I printed out the white paper from Satoshi Nakamoto and I put it on my night desk. And then one day, I think it was a couple of weeks later, I went home from a presentation I had as a keynote speaker in Würzburg, and there were 1,000 people. I was doing a presentation for my first book, and I was thrilled. I was on adrenaline, and I couldn't fall asleep. And I thought, oh, this will help. It looks boring. It's English, and it's a math formula in it. So I think I will asleep after the first few sentences. But the opposite happened. I was thrilled. I was quite awake, and I couldn't sleep the whole night. I even woke up my wife and said, hey, that's the solution. I've got goosebumps all over my body. And she said, okay, let me sleep or I get a divorce. So that when I realized Bitcoin is the solution, the next day I bought Bitcoin in 2013. It wasn't that easy in Germany. It was pretty early. Yeah. And since then, I'm in the rabbit hole. And I know Bitcoin it's a present from heaven and it's a solution for many problems, not for all, but for many.
So I was actually working for a hedge fund in Dallas, Texas, and I was going down a rabbit hole of why the Federal Reserve, the central bank in the United States, why they had to print digitally $3.6 trillion during the financial crisis. And I figured out through that process that they were never going to be able to unwind it, and they were always going to have to print money, and that ultimately the printing of money causes currencies to fail, and that's a real problem. At that same time, I was asked to go do diligence on a gold company in Canada, and serendipitously, I got to meet Safety Namus, who wrote the Bitcoin Standard, and he really helped me understand what money was. I had never learned that. You don't learn what money is in school. They teach you finance and economics, but not what money is. So Safety Namus, the author of the Bitcoin Standard, really helped me understand that, and that was when I started to understand why Bitcoin had fundamental value. And I started to see that Bitcoin was the solution to the printing of money. And so the printing of money impacts everybody in the world. And we need Bitcoin because literally every last individual in the world needs sound money. They need the ability to be able to deliver value to other human beings and to store that value into the future.
So the start of the company basically was, it started from a problem, from my own problem that I had and problems that many people in my kind of surroundings had, friends of mine, family, colleagues, etc. I was into Bitcoin for quite some time already. 2015, I discovered Bitcoin, and then 2018, 19, when Relay started and the idea kind of started to come. It was really a big pain point was for normal people to get into Bitcoin. A lot of people were interested in Bitcoin, but it was hard for them to find an easy app where with a couple of clicks, with a couple of minutes, they could just buy Bitcoin, right? A lot of them wanted, but then 9 out of 10 didn't end up doing it, unfortunately, because it was too complicated. And this was really like, I felt like very strongly about this. I felt like this is the best savings technology. This is the best money human beings have ever invented. But 9 out of 10 people who want to buy it cannot buy it. I wanted an easy way for people to buy it, to hold it, to save in Bitcoin. And so that was one. And then two, also my own problem, because I wanted to auto invest, like have a DCA plan, $50 a week, $100 a month, whatever, just on a regular basis, stack stats, right? And this was also something that wasn't really possible. There was no service for that. So I combined these two kind of ideas of having a very easy mobile app that everyone can use to buy Bitcoin, hold the Bitcoin, like the seed themselves, and set up a savings plan. So basically solve both of these problems.
Second question.
How did your brother basically come up with this? With Fatty, then, do you also or I wouldn't say sponsor, but do you also spread your message to, because you're from Nigeria, you said before, right?
Yeah.
Do you also work in Nigeria with Fedi, or how did you get the idea of writing your own book? What made you to do that? I mean, was it Bitcoin, or was it just, hey, let's give it a try? Or hey, educator, then how do you address common lies, misconceptions, just bullshit about Bitcoin? Do you think currently we are at war with the state? Because they always say, oh, World War III is going to be nuclear. I'm like, no. World War III is a state against people. What threat do you see in the near future, especially for my generation? Like, I'm 19, so what is the biggest threat that Bitcoin faces in future times? When did the idea then come with me bringing a Bitcoin? Was that a rapid decision, or did you really plan it everything? What was the number one thing that was hard? Or what was basically annoying you? Was it the traveling? Was it that you had to orange pill people sometimes? What for you personally is the best and simplest lightning wallet? I always ask myself, would you be willing, or do you do that you use miners and the heat they produce to heat your farm? How do you see the role of privacy then and decentralization in the future of digital currencies taking place? What are the biggest misconceptions about Bitcoin? I mean, we all have seen news where they say, it's not climate friendly, or it uses so much energy. My second question then is, how does your perspective on freedom of the press especially has changed with this case of your husband? What would you see and say is a future risk for Bitcoin, especially Bitcoin adoption globally? How do you see Strike evolving in the next 5 to 10 years? How do you then address common misconceptions and criticism about Bitcoin? How do you see the role of Austrian economics in shaping our modern financial system play? My second question then is, how did you get to eventually write you wrote a book, right, about Bitcoin? And yes. How did you end up with doing that? You eventually ended up in creating your own conference on Madeira.
Yes.
And that must have been a huge step for you, I guess. Was it hard, or, how did you even have the idea for doing that? When we talk about that, buying Bitcoin it's easy nowadays. It's not the hardest thing anymore. But it's also a risk nowadays, because when we talk about that everyone is at risk or at their own risk when investing into Bitcoin, how do you approach this? How do you tell your customers what to do, what not to do?
And to answer your second question, how was it that we did this with my brother? So we started in 2020 organizing our first conference, ChainCamp, only for Czech people. It was during the COVID. So it was some kind of a window of opportunity. We saw there is no other conferences in Czech Republic, but there is a big demand of people who want to meet and talk about Bitcoin and educate themselves. And we used to organize small parties with my brother. We like to meet people. We like networking. We like good music and good food and good drinks. So we said to ourselves, okay, let's organize a small conference. Yeah. We put together the first conference during the COVID. There was 500 people. The year next it was actually during the lockdowns.
Oh, okay.
So we managed 500 people during the lockdown, where was a short window where there was no restriction. It was like 2 weeks. And the year after we had 1,000 people. The year after we had 2,000 people, Czech only. And that gives us a good signal that there is a demand for these conferences. And we decided that we will run one more conference, which is BTC Prague, which is in Prague. It's international, it's in English language. And that kind of brings us to this year.
Oh, eCash has applicability worldwide, but our focus at Fedi is the people who are the most disempowered communities. It's for communities everywhere. So we start with the most disempowered communities around the world. And maybe at some point in 4 or 5 years' time, we'll look at others. But right now, that's our focus. So we look at communities mainly in Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia, and beyond.
So I started writing about Bitcoin online, And I really intended just to start writing a newsletter, but it turned out to just organically evolved into a much more fundamental series about Bitcoin and helping people understand Bitcoin in a very logically ordered way. I like to think that Bitcoin's difficult to see, but it's impossible to see once it clicks for somebody. And I had read the Bitcoin Standard, and that really helped me. But there was a lot that I still had to work through beyond that to really develop conviction around Bitcoin. And so I thought that I could help other people accelerate their journey to Bitcoin and not have to suffer all of the challenges that I did if I could help articulate the things that I had to work through in my own mind and get those down on paper. So my ultimate goal was to be able to help accelerate more people to Bitcoin and to harden existing people that were interested, harden their understanding or improve their understanding.
With a lot of patience, honestly. I do it both ways, through videos and personal classes. I'm a teacher in Bitcoin Isla, so it's BTC Isla. I started a school, and I noticed there's a lot of stigma around Bitcoin. Many of them think it's a scam, and you just have to have patience and teach them the right way. Obviously, there's people that want to listen, and then there's people that, have their mind already made up about Bitcoin. But you have to educate them and show them what is Bitcoin for them to make a choice. You can't make a choice about it if you don't truly understand it 100%. And in the videos, I try to make it entertaining and explain it simply for, to reach the masses, because that's everyone's end goal.
I really think that we are on a trajectory where the state, but not just the state, is at war with the people of the world. So essentially the way I see it is a bit more of a zoomed out picture. It's not just the government and the state. There are global powers that are basically trying to continue operating that same fiat slavery system so that they can get our productivity in return to the money that they need to constantly create to continue blowing that bubble of fiat, right? It's not just about the money. It's also about control and surveillance. So they really want ultimate control over humanity so that they can continue having that slave race called humanity that they can continue suck out the productivity from. And so I think that the first step you need to take in order to see the bigger picture is to firstly understand that it's the state against you.
I mean, the weird thing is every time that there's some sort of threat and Bitcoin overcomes it, it tends to do really well price wise, right? And I think the biggest threat is also sort of the biggest opportunity, and that's nation state level oppression. And we're starting to see it. We saw some of the samurai devs getting arrested, stuff like that. So I think that's the next vector.
Actually, so Mi Primer Bitcoin, as an organization, we're an NGO, a non-profit based in El Salvador, non-governmental either. And so it was founded by John Tenehi. He's from New York and he lives in El Salvador now. He has a kid in El Salvador too. But so he started it end of 2021. And I heard about it. I will say in 2022, actually. I just didn't wanted to be involved, or I just thought that maybe it was just a bunch of nerds. I saw it and I saw that they would have meetups, but I was already studying Bitcoin on my own, but I really didn't feel comfortable still to go out there and try. And I'm a woman, so it was a little bit intimidating because I was thinking that I didn't know enough. But then I started to collaborate. I was like, okay, let's see. So I was volunteering, going to graduations with the kids, and I saw what they were doing. And then I thought, okay, this is really cool. This is very nice. And I don't need to be there super technical either. You know, we have our Bitcoin diploma is a very basic one. That's not a book for Bitcoiners. That's for people that wants to learn from zero to something, right? And then you pick up your path.
Yeah.
So I saw it and then I took it. I took the course. And then I told them, hey, listen, like if there are any, hours, I can teach classes on the weekend maybe, because I was still having my job. And then that's when they eventually said, hey, you know what? We want a teacher to go to Guatemala. Long story short, I went. And that's when I was like, I want to do this.
I think the most tricky thing was that when you're in these countries, you're trying to relay information which is completely the opposite to what we experience in the West, right? So you're saying how people use custodial wallets, like wallets, for example. People online are like, oh my god, they're not self-sovereign, how dare you? And you feel like grabbing them and shaking them and saying, listen, mate, this person lives in a street that doesn't have electricity for 8 hours a day. Their roof that's above their house looks like it's going to collapse at any moment. Their kids, they're struggling to keep their kids in school, and their reality is so far removed from your reality. And you have the cheek to then turn around and lecture them on how to use Bitcoin a little bit better without really getting to watch the context of the situation. So yes, travel is hard, yes, orange billing is hard, but when you do see people using Bitcoin in the way that is appropriate for them in their context, and then you get people online who doesn't have that, that's when it gets really frustrating.
It's a hard question because there's kind of two answers. It's like, what is the simplest and what is the most self-sovereign? And those are totally two different answers. And so I'm trying to find a middle ground that can start people off really simply, where they don't have to worry about lightning channels and fees and all that, but lead themselves towards self-custody. And I think my answer right now that I'm starting to show people is Mutiny Wallet. So Mutiny Wallet, it does something in the background that makes it so you don't have to pay a bunch of fees to set up channels. There's trust involved, but you can say to the person, all right, open this wallet up, hit a couple buttons, and it pretty much sets itself up. And then you can say to them, once you get a large enough balance, once you've got, 1 million sats or something, hit this button, and then you take full self-custody. And it's still not as simple enough, but it's going in the right direction.
So I would. The issue is in most areas, it's not cold enough to require heat. So what I actually have is a facility that I cool very similarly to how you would cool a mining facility. So the lights inside of the greenhouse and the dehumidifiers produce an enormous amount of heat. So we have large exhaust fans and louvers that will passively cool the facility through sucking air through it. So it's just like when you see shipping containers that have a bunch of miners in it, and one side has an open louver and the other side has a big exhaust fan. Mm-hmm. The greenhouse that I run has the same cooling system. And so if I were in a climate where it was really cold, I would definitely be using Bitcoin miners to heat the facility. But in most locations, due to the equipment and the heat that they produce, you actually need to run cooling in these facilities.
That's a good question. And we're at like a really interesting inflection point because like in the United States with Trump throwing all of his weight behind Bitcoin, like he's really politicized it. And so it's going to be interesting to see if people actually start understanding the real value adds that Bitcoin offers beyond just being a new financial tool. And so one of my great fears is that there's a real possibility that like financialized Bitcoin and KYC Bitcoin becomes the dominant version, which would really actually reduce sort of Bitcoin's mission on a whole, in my opinion. Or there's the much more cypherpunk way where people actually realize that self-sovereign Bitcoin is the real way to actually use Bitcoin in a meaningful way. And that as we sort of expand and have more people build out the tools, that'll sort of fragment in an interesting way where I think we'll still have the ability to create privacy and be able to protect ourselves, but the ecosystem will be much more fragmented. And so right now, it's really going to be interesting to see how the American presidential elections play out, because I think that's going to be a real key in kind of seeing if we get big mass adoption or if we get a more fragmented vision where there's some financialized Bitcoin, more privacy-oriented Bitcoin. And on that note, like I think all of the experimentation going on inside and around Bitcoin is really important. And so whether we choose to add convents or we start using other new methods like Chaumian eCash mints or things like that, I think there's huge potential to actually start working towards building the tools to create the privacy and freedom that we need in order to ensure that there is a much more equitable and free future where we can protect our privacy.
Well, I mean, I think that is a misconception because, I mean, they sort of try to characterize it as wasteful. And, there are many things wrong with that characterization. One is in a market, people who buy things can, it's their economic choice, right? So if I buy food or buy a pair of trainers, like nobody's saying is that wasteful. It's like, well,
Yeah, freedom of choice, right?
some people buy lots of trainers, like they collect them, right? So I mean, nobody's like, oh, it's wasteful, you shouldn't do that. So if I enjoy buying digital coins, then why is anybody else's job to have an opinion about that? Really, they can pay more for the power, and then we'll do less of it, right? So then I think the other thing that they're confused on is they will say, well, you should change, Bitcoin should change to not use for work. And I think that's a misconception because, I mean, it's kind of subtle, but basically, if you think about why did gold become money? It's because it was scarce, right? If it wasn't scarce, it wouldn't be usable as money. And so then I think there's an implication there, which is anything that is scarce is going to necessarily have a production cost. You're going to have to dig it up and refine it. And so I think it's sort of necessary that any commodity money, whether it is physical like gold or electronic like Bitcoin, it has to have a production cost or it's not really scarce.
Freedom of the press is just an idea. And the reality is it doesn't exist because even the proponents for freedom of the press, the biggest proponents, the ones who talk about it the most, are the ones doing this to him. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't exist. And I think while there are many journalists who back Julian and who are supporting him and journalist organizations and so on, there is a sector of the media that actually doesn't care that there is no freedom of the press. Mm-hmm. And it's important to understand that the media serves many purposes. And there are some true journalists in the media who risk their lives, who are really committed. And even inside the mainstream media, it's not just alternative versus mainstream. There are people inside the mainstream media who are actually trying to do their job well. But there are also some people inside those media institutions who are not serving the informing the public, who are not serving what journalism is supposed to be about. And so you're not dealing with, when you're dealing with the media, you're not dealing with a single thing. You're dealing with different types of people working within the media.
The biggest risk for Bitcoin is that the Bitcoiners themselves probably get arrogant and indulgent. All empires collapse from within because of the corruption of the ruling class after they win. And so Bitcoin right now is going to continue to grow, and it'll, and at the point that Bitcoin becomes half of all the capital in the world, probably the people that were in the Bitcoin space will start to think that they're smarter than all the humans that came before them.
Yeah.
Just like the people that ran Rome thought they were smarter than the Greeks, and the Greeks thought they were smarter than the Persians, and the Venetians thought they were smarter, and the Brits thought they were smarter, and the Americans thought they were smarter. And so ultimately, the danger is always corruption after success.
And also being greedy, probably. If you were greedy, maybe.
Yeah, and that's why I just counsel everyone to keep your laser eyes on, stay focused, stay humble.
Stack sats.
Stack sats.
Well, I mean, at Strike, we think Bitcoin is the best money that mankind has ever conceived. We think that things like the Lightning Network are the one only open value transfer protocol that mankind's ever conceived. And so that's the vision, is that Bitcoin, I mean, money is the most important technology humanity's ever created. And we're living through a time where we've invented the most impressive one. And so our business is just predicated on delivering financial services through that. So we use this open value transfer protocol for payments like remittance. We use the fact that Bitcoin is amazing money in brokerage, and we sell Bitcoin. So that's it, is Bitcoin financial services. And I think we have decided to be regulated. We believe that Bitcoin institutions are going to be important to its future. I don't think companies are going away. I think people enjoy the convenience of a product as long as you can hold the business accountable, right? Which I think Bitcoin does. There are no bailouts. So yeah, in the next 5 to 10 years, it's a simple business. We listen to our customers. So the way we talk about it internally is we work for Bitcoiners. So Bitcoiners tell us what to do, and we do it. And that's right now, people love buying Bitcoin from us, but maybe in 5 to 10 years, they're going to want other things. And we're going to be licensed, compliant, leading technology, and a leading voice in the space to do whatever Bitcoiners need us to do.
So Satoshi is your boss, basically.
Yeah, 100%. I'm going to put that on a t-shirt. Satoshi's my boss.
Satoshi's my boss. But not Craig Wright.
I usually address that in layers, because usually there is always an easy answer, which is not deep, and a deep answer, which is not easy. The easy answer, which is not deep, is just put the real numbers in context. So Bitcoin consumes energy, yes, but you can see that it's like, I don't remember the exact numbers right now, but usually I show the Bitcoin Mining Council infographic, where you see that Bitcoin is like something like 1% of the total energy production and 3% of the total wasted energy. So we are talking about a fragment of the energy we waste on other stuff. So don't bother me. Or you can compare that with the Christmas lights or university electricity consumption or military consumption of energy, something like that. So the first is not that bad. But then you go deeper and you try to address something else. It's not just not that bad. It could actually be good.
Oh, it had an underrated practical impact on the world, and it's underrated because it was largely invisible. You know, the Austrian School of Economics emerged within a society in crisis, which wasn't too different from the situation we're in right now. It was a time of geopolitical upheaval, of financial crisis, societal and psychological crisis, and a few of the foremost thinkers of their time had a very realistic and interdisciplinary approach to societal phenomena. And they understood that due to the complexity, you can't really understand societies the same way you understand a machine, where you may have some top-down organizational and engineering principles, but it's more like a living organism that you have to observe. So there was quite some overlap between the advances in the natural sciences and biology and medicine, psychology, and the Austrian School of Economics. And that's why it's still relevant today, even though it emerged in the 19th century.
Actually, I had an idea writing a big Bitcoin book already in 2013, but my publisher said, no, don't do it. To mention it, I wrote 6 books, and my 7th book, it's a Bitcoin only book, and it's actually, I've worked like 2.5 years on it, and it's the biggest work I've ever did. It's 600 pages, but I wanted to look back in history. Why does money always die? And so it's 2,000 years of history of money, and it's actually the perfect case for Bitcoin, because it always falters, it always dies because of us, of human and of mankind. So that's why Satoshi Nakamoto took us out of the white paper. You don't have to trust a person, you don't have to trust an emperor or a politician. You trust the code. That's it, and that's why it's so perfect. It's the first time somebody separated the government and the monetary system, and that's the solution actually. And I knew I want to write this book, and the time was mature in 2023, and I published it in 2024 this year.
Well, it all starts with the project. We first decided to do a community project in Madeira. You know, being a Bitcoiner, I wanted to do more for the place I live, I guess. And we had the support of a lot of influential Bitcoiners, so that was the real deal, I guess. People like Jeff Booth and Olby and Gigi and many others that helped us. And eventually we decided to do a conference. We thought it would be good for Free Madeira, the project, to host a conference and not only try to orange pill the locals, but also bring the Bitcoiner community to visit Madeira.
Yeah, I think it's really about education and about making people understand, even when they're very, very early still in their Bitcoin journey, like they maybe only heard about it from the media or from a friend of them, and then they're getting into it from the beginning. It's important to make them understand what Bitcoin really is, because they think it's very volatile. It's something that can go up and down. It's very speculative. It's something that might go away. It's something that is it makes them feel very insecure. So very important is to make them understand what it is. It's savings technology. It's a digital asset. It's a digital property. It's digital gold. It's long-term savings. You don't think about it as buy today and sell tomorrow, but it's a long-term, like think about it as digital gold, which you want to hold for your whole life, ideally. And it's very different from altcoins. It's just not the same. There are 2.4 million altcoins out there, and all of them are not even close to Bitcoin. It's just a different category. Bitcoin is digital gold, it's savings technology, and it's to store your wealth, store your purchasing power for a very long time, that you can hold yourself, that is censorship resistant, that is decentralized, that is independent and neutral, and all the other cryptos are not.
Third question.
What are your goals then for next year, 2025? Yeah, 2025. You always say Bitcoin is for everyone, but I always ask myself, is it truly for everyone, or is it just for those who understand it and are willing to accept it? But how is it then going with Bitcoin, especially in California? Are they adoption friendly, or are they like a Bitcoin, What can the public do? And we as Bitcoiners, because Julian has been involved with Bitcoin, right? What can we do as Bitcoiners to support him and basically support free journalism? What do you think is the most misunderstood aspect of Bitcoin? What are the most important principles of Austrian economics that you believe have been overlooked? Bitcoin for me is a peaceful revolution, because all the revolutions always have been bloody. And Bitcoin is for me the first and final one which is not bloody.
I agree.
Do you think that in Germany especially, or in Europe, where they're currently, how should I call it? They teach our children how to be slaves, right? It starts already in school. Do you think that we can change that with Bitcoin? What opportunities do you see for a worldwide Bitcoin adoption then?
So let's say my personal goals, I will say, is that I want to start creating more of, that, I mean, I wouldn't say a book, but a little bit of that, document the part that I felt like it's been helpful for me, the one didn't, with the connections. This is a very good time to be at. It's a very nice time where we can hang out still at Beacon Conference with other people, but we're still so early. So then eventually more people is going to come, and while coming to conference and talking to one-on-one people or in groups or in panels, and then eventually people approaching you to ask you what you do and how they can help. I think I'm even learning about networking. So, just to see what how it works with good network in a good sense, right? Like not to see everything as a business. So I will say that I would like to start putting, like the energy and the mind to be a little bit more prepared, and then also document what works, what it doesn't. And then with the network, with Mi Primer Bitcoin, we definitely want to, like expand the network. At the moment, we are about 25 communities around the world that are teaching the Bitcoin diploma. And so we are trying to develop more educational resources. Like we had the Bitcoin diploma, right? Okay, great. Let's create a lesson plan guide. So we did, right? Okay, let's create what's the best approach for the online environment and not in person. Okay, great. So, just to see and always be in the lookup of what else needs to be done.
Well, everybody needs Bitcoin. Everybody would benefit from virtuous, economically sound, ethically sound, and technically sound capital. And that's what Bitcoin represents. So those that understand it will embrace it. The world's full of people that don't understand it. They still need it. They just don't know they need it. So I would say Bitcoin is for everyone that understands it now, and it's for everyone that doesn't understand it when they finally come around to understanding and appreciating it.
So I would say that California is not going to be much different than any of the other states as far as the citizens or the populace and the adoption rate. There are states within the United States that have much more, Bitcoin-friendly regulators and politicians than in California. There's no public politicians or politicians in California that are publicly Bitcoin advocates that I'm aware of. So I will say, as far as the adoption goes, I think it's similar to the rest of the country where people are using it as a savings technology. And because of the tax implications in the United States, because it's taxed as property, creating circular economies or spending Bitcoin creates a bit of a tax conundrum for the people who aren't super sophisticated and capable of keeping track of all of that. If they want to adhere to the tax laws and pay the taxes. So for me and the people that I know who I have helped encourage to adopt Bitcoin as a treasury reserve asset or as a savings technology, they don't spend it. They earn a surplus and save it. And that's that's been my strategy is I try to spend less than I earn, and then all of the extra that I produce, I put into Bitcoin, and the goal is to not have to spend it if I don't have to. But if there's some sort of emergency that requires me to access the capital, then obviously I would do so. But I actually try not to spend Bitcoin. Even when I travel, I don't want to buy coffee with it and whatnot, because technically I'm creating taxable events. And due to the nature of my business, I take a very conservative approach towards my taxes. I want to be lawful and forthright because I've been a cannabis producer and I have a history of being a cannabis producer. I want to make sure that there's no question about how lawful my activities are. And so
my message is for the Bitcoin community is get behind Julian, understand his significance to the future of Bitcoin, and his freedom is coupled to what everyone in this community wants to achieve, which was, the true fulfillment of human potential. And to the broader community, I'd say, freeing Julian is also essential to basic fundamental democratic rights. He is being persecuted because he published the truth. The truth is being criminalized. They're using and abusing the law in order to crack down against a journalist who held governments to account.
I think that people don't appreciate that Bitcoin is a physical bearer instrument, is that it takes energy from the physical world. It takes physical power and transforms it into a digital token. And so Bitcoin you can use Bitcoin like you would use a physical coin. And so if you understand that, Bitcoin's not an IOU, it's not a security, it's not a promise. It doesn't have a relationship with a government, or it doesn't have a relationship with a founder. And then you combine that with the fact that Satoshi Nakamoto found a way to protect a digital program with physical power. Well, we can program it to be scarce, and we can program it to move instantly. That is fundamentally the most misunderstood part. Is like, people will say, well, what's the difference between a CBDC and Bitcoin?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, Bitcoin is protected by the physical world and uses physical energy to, one, operate the system, and then two, defend it. Whereas CBDCs are an abstraction of government.
I think the most important one is a realistic approach to the world. And a realism means that you assume that there's a shared common reality by human beings. That's maybe not intuitively obvious, but still it's a real world that we share, and where we are not free to arbitrarily construct ideas and ideals, but a lot of it is experience in how the world and how other people react to what we do. And that makes up for this complexity. And it's a very humble approach, the realistic one, because most of philosophy was dominated by idealism, as you have these big ideas and big words, and you think that you're very clever and you can understand everything, in particular the intellectuals. They think they get it all. Like the typical reaction of an intellectual or academic, if he learns about Bitcoin, is like, oh, I read this article about it. Now let me tell you how to fix it. Because that's wrong and that can't work, and things like that. And realism is the totally opposite approach.
Yes, it's the only solution, the only hope, actually, because like I described in my book, to establish a new monetary system, the foundation was always a war. So humanity always needs a crisis to learn. Look back in your own history, in your own biography. You always learn if you get hurt. So you need a catharsis. You need the pain, actually. Yeah? Like they say, no pain, no gain. And it's always in the evolution of mankind. We always needed, for example, a crisis to create a new monetary system. And the last time we had it, 1944, the Bretton Woods monetary system. And the problem was there was a world war before. We needed this fucking world war. We needed this war to create a sound monetary system, because 1944, the dollar was backed with gold. So we had a sound monetary system. And then 1971, they closed the gold window because of another war, and the costs are too high. So that's why they had to close the gold window. And that's why we always need a crisis. And remember, Bitcoin is a child of the financial crisis.
I mean, I think it will be very, very widely adopted. It might, like you said, maybe not the whole world. I mean, define. I mean, the internet in the 90s, probably no one thought that it would be globally adopted. And now not everyone has access to the internet, but like in Western countries, it's more than 95% that has a smartphone, and like very close to 100% that has somehow access to the internet. So, but not everyone, is true. But I think we can get to a very, very large amount, big majority, like much more than 50%, probably closer to 70, 80, 90% of the people and the companies that will adopt Bitcoin as a digital asset, as a digital form of store of wealth, digital capital, digital property. And this will happen in very various ways, from retail investors that, you know, have $100 a month that they want to save long term and maybe someday buy a house with it or a car with it. They will adopt it as like savings technology. Then some Bitcoin freaks like us at the conferences, we are adopting it as, you know, medium of exchange and buying beers and wines and coffees with it.
Fourth question.
What advice would you give to me or newcomers, especially from my generation, which my generation, to be honest with you, they're not clever. They haven't been raised to be clever. They have been raised to be just sit in your room in school, raise
Yep.
your hand if you have a question, and if you don't have a question, just be quiet, right? Be the perfect soldier. Also rat race, in a sense. What advice would you give for the new generation, especially people like me? So my last question for you then is, how can individuals, so me and you, for example, apply Austrian economics and its principles to make our life better? Since you're the last guest for those interviews I did, the best always comes at the end. So I always ask that everyone, what do you think of Christine?
Like life advice, I would say, if I were to talk to my 18-year-old self, I would just reinforce the idea to stay curious. Like, obviously, I would tell my 18-year-old self to buy Bitcoin. So the 19-year-old you, I would tell you to stay humble and stack sats. But more philosophical, I would say stay curious. Because to your point, the world does try and, in my opinion, confine the reality in which you see the world. And you need that curiosity to be unbounded. And so that'd be like my one-liner is to stay curious and show up every day. You know, the proof of work compounds on itself. So I think because people will ask me all the time, like, oh man, how did you create a business? Or how did you do this? And the answer is, I don't know. The real answer is like, I just followed my own curiosities and I showed up every day and I did the work.
Well, this kind of realism at first, it helps you differentiate between the things that you can change and that are really part of your own environment and things that are outside of that. And it's best to approach the large geopolitical sphere that we all see in the news every day as a kind of natural catastrophe that you can just observe. But don't get too angry about it. Don't get too upset about it, because otherwise you'll be frustrated and just watching the havoc that's brought upon the world, and you feel like you can't change anything about it. But that's not how change happens. So change rarely happens on the geopolitical sphere or even the political sphere. It usually happens through technology. It happens through societal progress, through discovery of things that work better and things that fail. So I think it's it brings you a calming and more serene approach to life. And also, of course, in investing, that's the most important thing, is not to overrate your own intelligence, not to be fooled by your own psychology in running along with everyone else, is to maintain your realistic calm and also understand that our brain is really good at rationalization, at fooling other people and fooling ourselves. And I think that's maybe what the Austrian school is for, to not be fooled by yourself and not be fooled by other people.
I don't know her like personally, so I can't and I don't want to judge her. I just think she should retire.
So, you made it until the end. Those were my 21 interviews I did with 21 people live at the BTC Prague conference 2024. And I just want to say one thing again. Thank you to both of the brothers who organized BTC Prague. And thank you to the viewers and listeners who made it until the end with me. And also a final thank you to all the people who joined me in those interviews. It was an honor to interview you. And yeah, stay humble, stack sats.
NoMad Podcast.